I was halfway across the yard, shotgun slung low and hands muddy from rewiring a fence sensor, when I heard my wife scream, not the startled yelp of someone who's dropped a dish or seen a spider. This was the kind of scream that doesn't have words in it, just terror. I ran, kicked open the barn door, and there they were, two of them in tactical vests marked HOA security, dragging her toward a black SUV with no plates. One had zip ties. The other had my wife's wrist twisted behind her back. They didn't see me yet, not until I stepped fully into the doorway, cold as ice, and said, "You boys picked the wrong hostage. Tell me, how would you react if someone kidnapped your wife off your own land, claiming it was an HOA enforcement action?" They started with the mailbox, a chipped corner to be exact. It was a Tuesday morning when the first letter arrived. Plain envelope, no stamp, hand-delivered like a threat. Violation of HOA Code 3.14. Exterior uniformity, it read. Apparently the wooden corner of our standard-issue beige mailbox had splintered from the last storm. I would have let it go. Fixed it that afternoon, maybe. But what caught my attention was the line scrawled in blue ink at the bottom. Second notice. We'd never gotten a first. My wife, Emily, laughed when she read it. Second notice? They're time-traveling now? I shrugged, chalked it up to bureaucratic incompetence, and moved on. But that was the start. That was the first scratch of the match on the edge of the box. What followed wasn't a fire. It was a slow, creeping smoke that filled every corner of our life. The next week, a second letter came. Then a third. Then two in one day. This time, it wasn't just the mailbox. Unapproved gate hinge, non-compliant hose storage, reflective surface exceeding 6 inches. I stared at the last one for a long time. Reflective surface? They were citing us for a windshield sunshade Emily used when she drove into town. She folded it neatly each time, kept it in the side compartment like a responsible adult. But now it was apparently a code violation. I asked her if she wanted to fight it. She just shook her head. "They're fishing, Mark," she said. "They'll keep casting lines until something bites." She wasn't wrong. Within a month, we had a total of 11 violations stacked on the kitchen table, like thinly veiled death threats. At first, I assumed we weren't the only ones being targeted. Maybe the HOA had new blood, some clipboard cowboy trying to prove himself. But when I talked to the neighbors, they all looked confused. "Nothing here," Mr. Bell said, flipping through his empty mailbox with the casual confidence of a man untouched. "You sure it's not a mistake?" I nodded slowly. It wasn't a mistake. It was a message, one I didn't understand yet. Then came the photos. That was the tipping point. An envelope slipped under our front door. No name, no return address. Just 4 glossy prints. My wife, crouched by the garden bed, pulling weeds in her sun hat. Another of her walking to the chicken coop. A third of her at the mailbox, flipping through envelopes. And the fourth, her bending over to fill the horse trough, back turned, unaware. "Jesus," I muttered, my knuckles whitening as I gripped the edges. "They're watching us." Emily took them from me. Her eyes didn't widen, didn't blink, she just stared. "I want them off our land," she said flatly. "All of them." I nodded. It was the first time I felt the weight in my chest shift from confusion to anger. I started noticing the compliance trucks more after that. Always the same. White pickups with magnetic HOA decals slapped on the doors. No plates I could memorize. No identifying numbers. They'd idle at the edge of our property, just outside the barbed wire, cameras pointing through the gaps. One time, I walked right up to one, knocked on the tinted window. The man inside rolled it down 2 inches. "You're trespassing," I said. He didn't blink. Just held up a clipboard and said, "Routine compliance scan. Your perimeter lighting violates section 9.2. Then he drove off. Didn't even give me a copy of the citation. I walked back to the porch, sat next to Emily, and said nothing. The silence between us was louder than any fight. Within a few weeks, new devices started appearing. Metal poles with tiny cameras mounted high, blinking blue at night like tiny digital eyes. At first, I thought they were utility upgrades. But when I followed the wires, they didn't connect to any infrastructure. They led straight to an unmarked junction box behind the community center, one that was padlocked and humming faintly. I confronted Karen, the HOA president, the next day. "You've got surveillance equipment on residential land," I said. "Who authorized that?" She looked up from her phone like I'd interrupted her mid-spa appointment. "Our new compliance initiative," she said sweetly. "We're modernizing. Eyes on the ground, 24/7. I stepped forward. "This isn't Baghdad, Karen." Her smile didn't budge. "No, Mark, but you, of all people, should know how effective persistent surveillance can be." That line hit me like a crowbar to the ribs. She knew. Or at least, she suspected. Emily became more withdrawn after that. She stopped tending the garden, stopped going to town, stopped smiling. One night I found her in the pantry with the lights off, just standing there. "I feel like I'm being hunted," she whispered. "Like there's always a red dot on my back." I pulled her close, promised her it would stop, but I didn't know how. Not yet. Then the HOA launched something they called Operation Harmony. Weekly emails, bullet-pointed lists of minor violations with photo attachments. But every week, our name was at the top. Same subject line, notice of ongoing non-compliance. They'd circle things in red. Emily's gardening gloves left on the porch, a towel draped over the horse fence, even a plastic kid's chair she kept near the coop to rest in. None of it broke any codes, but that didn't stop them. "We're being framed," I told Walt, our neighbor and part-time chaos theorist. He nodded, sipping from a mason jar full of what I hoped was tea. "They're softening you up," he said. "Like wild dogs. Pick at the nerves until you bleed compliance." The next stage was psychological. They stopped knocking, stopped sending letters. They just hovered, parked out front, unmoving for hours. Drones circled overhead, sometimes just high enough to be legal. One time, Emily was taking laundry off the line when a drone zipped down to eye level and hovered. She screamed. I grabbed my old Remington and fired 2 warning shots into the air. The drone buzzed off. The next day, we got another violation. Discharge of firearm within HOA perimeter. 1-0 fine. The irony was sickening. They'd provoked me, and then punished me for reacting. Emily started sleeping in the guest room. Said my restlessness was keeping her up. But I knew it wasn't me. It was the paranoia, the waiting. She'd wake up every night at 2 a.m., check the locks, stand by the window. I caught her once with a kitchen knife in her hand, just standing at the back door. She didn't even realize she'd picked it up. Then came the staged noise complaint. Saturday night, 8:17 p.m. I'd just finished welding a gate post. Emily was inside, reading. The power went out. Cut clean. 10 minutes later, 2 HOA enforcers showed up with flashlights, claiming they'd received a complaint about illegal machinery. One of them had a body cam. The other started taking photos of the welding tools and accused me of running a commercial operation on residential land. I laughed. That was my first mistake. The next morning, we had a letter on our porch, again hand-delivered, accusing us of violating zoning ordinances. The fine, 50. I asked them for the original complaint. Anonymous tip, they said. We can't disclose. I knew it was them. They'd set the power out themselves, probably flipped the breaker at the utility box. The machines weren't even on. They were baiting me. I tried contacting the county, the sheriff's office, even the state compliance board. Nobody cared. Civil matter, they said. Take it up with the HOA board. That's when it hit me. There was no board, just Karen. Karen and her inner circle of cronies. The so-called compliance patrol, men in polos 2 sizes too tight, walking around like mall cops with delusions of grandeur. They weren't trained, weren't licensed, but they wore radios, had clipboards, even badges they printed off Etsy. By the time the 4th month rolled around, Emily stopped answering the door. She stopped checking the mail. She wouldn't even go outside unless I walked with her. And even then, she stayed close, eyes scanning every corner like she expected a sniper in the birdbath. "They're not going to stop," she said one night, eyes wide, voice barely a whisper. They want us gone. I looked around our home, our land, the barn I built, the coop she painted, the porch swing where we used to drink coffee every morning, and I felt something rise inside me. Something I'd buried deep when I left the force. A cold, methodical fire. I sat at the kitchen table that night and laid out every letter, every citation, every photo, every fake violation. I created a timeline, a pattern, a dossier. It was obvious now. It wasn't random. It wasn't code enforcement. It was targeted, escalated harassment, deliberately aimed at Emily, at her routines, her spaces, her comfort zones. I looked at her across the table, pale, drawn, haunted, and I swore to myself that it would end. I didn't know how yet, but I'd been trained to root out threats, to clear houses, to extract hostages. I just never thought I'd be doing it for my own wife, from an HOA. But this wasn't about suburban politics anymore. This was war. And I hadn't even started fighting back. The man showed up on a Tuesday, just past noon, wearing boots that looked like they'd kicked down doors in Fallujah and a tactical vest 3 sizes too tight. He didn't knock, didn't even announce himself. Just stepped out of a white Ford Explorer with a laminated badge hanging from a carabiner, black Oakleys hiding whatever soul might have still been in his eyes. HOA enforcement, it read. Not security, not compliance officer, just enforcement. The nameplate clipped beneath the patch said, Riker. Of course it did. I watched from the second barn window, one hand on a crowbar, the other instinctively reaching for the burner phone Walt insisted I carry after the last violation. Emily was on the porch watering her succulents, barefoot and humming some song I hadn't heard in months, peaceful, unaware. I saw Riker's posture shift when he spotted her, chest out, thumbs in his belt, the kind of walk men use when they're trying to own the ground under their boots. I moved fast. By the time I reached the hallway, he was already at the porch steps. I heard the exchange through the cracked kitchen window. Ma'am, he barked, voice crisp and condescending. I need access to your side yard. Routine code verification. Emily turned off the hose and blinked. You're not supposed to enter without 24-hour notice, she said. Not confrontational, just firm. She always was better than me at diplomacy. Riker stepped closer. You've got an illegal structure behind your chicken coop. Neighbor flagged it. Emily frowned. That's a compost bin. Been there 5 years. Not registered, he snapped, glancing down at a clipboard like he was reading off a war crimes charge sheet. Also saw an unapproved water barrel. Could be a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Biohazard risk. Emily wiped her hands on her jeans and folded her arms. I'd like to see your ID. That's when his whole body language changed. Shoulders squared, chin lifted. He stepped onto the porch, closing the distance too quickly. I'm not required to show ID. I'm contracted through the board, he said. You refusing compliance? Emily didn't flinch. You don't have jurisdiction here without a warrant or verified HOA documentation. You can stand there and write your fake citation, but you're not crossing the property line. And that's when it happened. He reached forward, not with a weapon, but with the practiced aggression of a man who knew how to control space and escalate without drawing first blood. His hand brushed her arm, then seized her wrist. Emily yanked back instinctively. Riker twisted with her movement and shoved, hard. Her back hit the wooden rail of the fence, snapping one slat clean off. She crumpled, breath gone, a choked gasp escaping her lips as her shoulders struck the dirt. By the time I was out the door, he had already stepped back, arms wide in a posture of mock innocence. She resisted, he said flatly. I responded with appropriate compliance force. Standard operating procedure. I didn't say a word. Just stared at my wife, her face twisted in pain, shoulder at a bad angle, hair full of dust and splinters. You son of a... I started, but Emily's eyes flicked to mine. Not fear, not shame, just cold, piercing clarity. She shook her head once, and I understood. We were being baited. Riker turned and walked off like he'd just delivered a UPS package. No rush, no guilt. He tossed a printed citation onto our porch without looking back. You can appeal through the board, he called over his shoulder. I carried Emily inside. Her collarbone wasn't broken, but her rotator cuff had taken a beating. Ice. Silence. Controlled breathing. I wrapped her arm in a sling, kissed her forehead, and then I went to the back room. There, hidden in a vent behind the bookshelf, was a backup security drive. The camera above the porch had caught everything, wide angle, audio included. I watched it 3 times. Watched his hand reach. Watched her shoulder twist. Watched him push. Watched her fall. Then, I copied the footage to 3 separate drives. One for me. One for Mia, Emily's cousin, a civil rights lawyer who once sued a police department for illegal detainment, and one for Walt, who had already mounted 4 drones and named them all after Greek goddesses. The next morning, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA, sent the footage, included timestamps, cross-referenced violation reports, and a demand for Riker's removal. I kept it surgical. No emotion. Just the kind of language I used when filing tactical debriefs after messy house raids. I waited 3 days. Got no reply. Then a single email from HOA board admin arrived. Incident under review. No further comment at this time. The following week, we received 5 new citations. 5, all dated 2 days before the incident. Exterior object exceeding visual compliance. Improper hose alignment. Unauthorized vegetation cluster. Unregistered livestock shade device. And intentional obstruction of compliance operations. That last one made me laugh out loud. It hurt to laugh. My hands were shaking. Emily didn't speak much that week, just moved slower, winced when reaching for a glass. Walt offered to go full bunker, but I shook my head. Not yet. Not until I knew what game they were playing. But something had shifted. Inside me, something old began to wake up. That weekend, I took inventory. Not of weapons, though I had plenty. No, this was subtler. I checked our security feeds, updated the firmware, adjusted camera angles to eliminate blind spots, mapped out every approach vector to the house and barn, not because I planned to strike, but because I was tired of being struck. I created a full dossier on Riker. Turns out he was ex-military, dishonorably discharged for excessive force during a training exercise. No rank listed. No photo on the HOA site. But I found his name in an old incident report buried in a public records dump from a private contractor audit. He'd worked security for an oil pipeline protest cleanup in 2017. Pepper sprayed a 12-year-old. No charges filed. Of course not. Karen knew who he was. She'd hired him for exactly that reason. I confronted her outside a community garden compliance walkthrough. She wore her signature tennis whites and carried a clipboard like it was a gavel. Riker assaulted my wife, I said plainly. And I have the footage. She smiled. He followed protocol. If she resisted, that's unfortunate. But the board can't take action based on an edited recording. It's not edited. She shrugged. Then you're welcome to submit it for review. But the board's position is final. There is no board, I growled. Her smile widened. That's what makes it so efficient. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon and watched the fence line. Walt joined me an hour later with a battered laptop and a dish of fried pickles. I ran facial recon on your boy Riker, he said. Cross referenced 3 protest footage databases and a militia tracker forum. He's bounced between 6 security firms. Got fired from 3. One was disbanded for operating as an unofficial paramilitary unit. He paused. You want the files? I didn't answer, just reached out and took the thumb drive. Emily stepped onto the porch around midnight, her arm still in a sling. She sat beside me in silence, watching the tree line. Finally, she spoke. You ever feel like we're not living on land anymore? Like we're living in a memory? I didn't answer, because that's exactly how it felt. They weren't just trying to intimidate us. They were trying to erase us, make us forget what home used to feel like, what normal used to be. But I remembered. I remembered how it felt to kick down a door, sweep a room, and find a child hiding in a closet. I remembered how it felt to hear your name called over the radio with the wrong kind of urgency. I remembered how it felt to stand in front of something fragile and say, "Not today." I'd buried those parts of myself, thought I could live like a civilian, be a husband, a farmer, a neighbor, but they weren't going to let me. The next morning, I built a command center in the barn loft. 3 monitors, thermal sensors, motion alerts, drone feeds. I ran cable through the rafters, linked everything to a mobile backup. Walt called it Fort Peace. Emily just watched in silence. That night, Riker drove by again. Didn't stop, just slowed down. Window down. Oakley's still on. I met his gaze. Didn't blink, just nodded once. He drove off. And I whispered, not to him, not to Emily, but to myself. You pushed her into the dirt. And somewhere deep inside, I knew what came next. The switch had flipped. Not revenge, not rage. Preparation. Cold. Clinical. Focused. Because I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was building a case. And when the day came, I would strike. Not loud, not wild. But with precision. It was a Thursday. The kind of overcast morning where the sky feels heavier than the ground, where nothing quite feels right, but you can't name why. I'd gone out to the far paddock to repair a busted post. One of the horses had leaned on it too hard the night before and snapped it clean. Walt had offered to come help, but I told him no. Said I needed some quiet time. The hammering helped me focus. Gave my hands something to do while my mind replayed the assault over and over again. Every time I blinked, I saw Riker's hand. Every time I breathed, I could hear Emily's shoulder hitting the dirt. But it was done. The cameras were rolling now. The traps were set. I thought I had time. I thought I was ahead. I was wrong. I came back to the house around noon. The door was wide open. Not ajar. Open. The curtains were fluttering like something had left in a hurry, or been taken. I felt it before I even stepped onto the porch. That silence. Too thick. Too unnatural. I called out. Nothing. My voice echoed off the hallway walls like it didn't belong there. The living room was undisturbed. Kitchen too. Coffee still warm in the pot. Her boots by the door. Her phone charging. But no Emily. Then I saw it. A single piece of paper on the entry table. No envelope. Just a printout in bold block letters. Neighborhood Safety Protocol. Section 12 Emergency Removal Enactment. Subject. Emily Ellis. Grounds. Ongoing non-compliance and resident escalation. Risk. Temporary relocation initiated at 11:08 a.m. No signature. No address. No contact number. Just a timestamp. And a header that read, Board action executed. I read it 3 times. Each word felt like a bullet. Removal. Risk. Executed. I didn't scream. Didn't throw anything. Didn't collapse. I went silent. Ice flooded my veins. I checked the porch cams, offline. Security feeds, scrambled. My rig, disabled. Someone had known exactly what to cut. They'd timed it. Waited for me to be gone. Moved fast. Clean. Practiced. Professionals. Or at least, trained to act like it. I called Walt. He answered on the second ring. I don't see her SUV, he said immediately. Was just looking at your driveway through the scope. They took her, I said. How long ago? 35, maybe 40 minutes. Black SUV, with temp tags. No plates. 2 uniforms. 1 clipboard. 1 zip tie gun. He paused. I thought you knew. I didn't, I said. My voice came out flatter than I expected. No tremble, no fire, just fact. I need your drives. Everything. From this morning. On it, he said. Meet me in the shack. The shack was Walt's name for his bunker. It had started as a root cellar and turned into a Cold War fantasy. He met me at the hatch with a hard drive, a gas station burrito, and a look that meant, don't ask me how I know any of this. We plugged in the drive. It was all there. 10:48 a.m. The SUV rolls up. 10:50. Riker gets out, clipboard in hand, followed by 2 younger enforcers in black. Emily answers the door, confused but calm. She gestures toward the porch. Riker shows her a paper. She steps out. One of the others flanks her. Then, without warning, they grab her. Zip tie her wrists. She resists. shouting something we can't hear. They lift her like she's furniture, and shove her into the back seat. 3 a.m. They're gone. Vanished down the private easement road that connects to the old service path behind the retention pond. My land, my road. Walt rewound it. "See that?" he said, pointing to the dash cam. "Oh, badge. But the bottom line says something new. Safety Transport Division." He looked at me. "They created their own enforcement wing. Where are they taking her?" I asked. Walt pulled up a second window, booted a drone camera, and traced the path. Only 2 turns they could take. One leads to the nature preserve. The other cuts toward the old logistics depot near county line. He clicked again. "Got a heat signature at the depot. Too many vehicles for an abandoned warehouse." I stood. "I'm going." Walt grabbed my wrist. "Wait. You go in now. Gun's hot. You don't get her back. You make a scene. They vanish her deeper. You know how these things work." I did. We weren't dealing with an HOA anymore. We were dealing with a machine, a privatized off-book enforcement mechanism masquerading as neighborhood governance. And they had my wife. We spent the next 4 hours pulling every server thread we could access. Walt spoofed HOA login credentials from the metadata in old citations. I pinged their internal mail servers and got access to a shared calendar. There it was. Resident Holding Session 3B, Ellis E. 12, 0 p.m., Compliance Facility B. Coordinates matched the logistics depot. A nondescript building with 4 cameras, 1 flagpole, no windows, and 2 trucks parked beside a loading dock marked Visitor Processing. I scrolled deeper. Found another name. Session 2A, Henderson L. Review complete. Clicked into it. Subject transferred to Harmony Recovery Network. Another click. Photo of a man I recognize from our own neighborhood. Quiet guy. Used to mow his lawn twice a week. Hadn't seen him in months. They'd taken him too, probably for planting tomatoes without a permit. "What is this?" I whispered. Walt answered without looking up. "It's a detainment program. Voluntary on paper, but enforced through compliance extraction. There's nothing legal about it, but they buried it under enough jargon to avoid the radar." I scrolled further. Neighborhood after neighborhood. Similar boards. Same phrasing. Safety transport. Behavioral adjustment. Resident re-education. It was bigger than us. Bigger than Karen. This was a network. And Emily had just become one of their targets. I stood. "Get me their logs. Badge rosters. Entry times. I want to know who signed off on it." "Already compiling," Walt said, sliding a USB drive into his terminal. And I tapped into their building security feed. Front door camera is on a delay loop, but I've got a back angle from an old utility post. No facial matches yet, but we've got timestamps. She went in. She hasn't come out. I clenched my jaw so hard I felt something shift in my molars. The rage wasn't wild. It wasn't loud. It was steady, like a sniper's breath before the shot. They'd taken her under the guise of protocol. Called it safety. But it was black bagging, pure and simple. Civilian rendition, disguised as suburban enforcement. And if I knew anything about people like Karen, she'd sanitized the whole thing. Put a wellness spin on it. Mental health hold. Voluntary compliance session. The kind of euphemism you use when you want to bury truth under 7 feet of legal mulch. I opened a private channel on my encrypted laptop, a network I hadn't used since my last active op. A SWAT team wasn't just a job, it was a bond. We had codes, phrases, ways to reach each other without saying too much. I dropped a message. Asset extracted, non-governmental, seeking surveillance and infiltration protocol backup. Target, pseudo-compliance, holding center, perimeter unknown, immediate need. 30 minutes later, I had 4 responses. Lando, Reed, Mira, Ghost, each with their own specialties. Each asking one question, when and where. I gave them the coordinates. Walt handed me a new drive. Everything they've got on you, every fine, every surveillance image, every note. They've been tracking you for 6 months. You weren't a random victim. You were the stress test. I looked at the map on the wall. 10 neighborhoods, same structure, same pattern. The HOA wasn't just enforcing property standards. They were building a blueprint for silent authoritarian control. No cops, no warrants, no oversight. Just fines, fear, and forced removals. And now they'd taken my wife. Bad move. I holstered my sidearm, picked up the radio, pulled the drive from Walt's machine. "They don't get to call this compliance anymore," I said, voice like gravel. "This is war." I tried law enforcement first. I gave them the footage, Emily being zip-tied and dragged into a black SUV with no plates, Riker issuing fake citations, the HOA's emergency removal letter. I dropped the full package at the county sheriff's desk, stacked with timestamps, digital proof, and a printed list of every fabricated violation we'd received over the last 3 months. I expected some reaction, alarm maybe, at least a frown. But the deputy just leaned back in his chair and sighed. "This looks like a civil matter, Mr. Ellis. HOA dispute. That's not in our lane." I stared at him. "You saw them take my wife." He shrugged. "They didn't use weapons. No proof she was restrained against her will. Looks like she went with them. If you've got a complaint, you can take it up in civil court." I left without another word. Because what I realized in that moment, what solidified everything, was that I was on my own. No badge, no backup, no cavalry coming over the hill, and that meant I could stop waiting. I didn't need permission to act anymore. The moment I stepped back onto the ranch, I shifted gears. The fence got reinforced first, welded steel supports under the cedar. I added barbed coil where the property line backed into the creek. Walt brought over 4 cases of IR trip sensors, motion cameras, and GPS-tracked perimeter alarms. "We're doing this the analog way," he said, tossing me a thermal cam with a grin. "Digital can be spoofed. Wires don't lie." He wasn't wrong. While the drones buzzed overhead, silent sentinels with night vision lenses, I started digging into paper. HOA bylaws, county ordinances, real estate transfers, LLC filings connected to the Harmony Compliance Initiative. I found the web. Karen was just the face. Behind her, 3 shell corporations owned by the same holding group that supplied private municipal security services to 6 other neighborhoods. The same ones who called their detainment centers residency reset zones. I traced it all back to a Denver-based legal consultancy that drafted the HOA charters. 1 charter, 6 variations. All identical in the language used to define behavioral correction measures. Every one of them buried the same clause under pages of legal jargon. In situations where non-compliance threatens communal harmony, emergency reassignment of property or persons may be initiated at board discretion. It was legalized kidnapping, sanitized, lawyered, hidden behind 5 layers of suburban civility. I made a wall, not metaphorical, an actual wall in my barn's loft, with pinned photos, maps, highlighter lines, thumbtacks, sticky notes in code. Walt called it the War Board. On it were names: Riker, Karen, the silent board members who never showed their faces but signed off on every violation. I tracked each of them, their vehicles, their habits, who they visited, when they left town. Then, I started cataloging the contractors. They rotated, but the SUVs were the same. Bulletproof. Government lookalikes. One of the license plates I finally caught on camera pinged as registered to a landscaping company with no active website and a warehouse address that matched one of the old FEMA depots. That was the turning point. That was when I knew we weren't just dealing with HOA paranoia. This was a system, a controlled, weaponized bureaucracy hiding in plain sight. While I worked the files, Walt worked the perimeter. We set up bait stations, fake violations like unauthorized trash bins, excess garden hoses, old barbecue equipment, things the HOA loved to cite. Then we waited. 3 days later, a patrol vehicle crept onto the property line and stopped. Camera mounted. No driver visible. It sat there for 6 minutes before backing out. No citation followed. No letter, just silence. We reviewed the drone feed that night. Walt zoomed in on the SUV. "That's not Riker," he muttered. "New guy. Or they're rotating to avoid pattern recognition." Either way, it meant they knew we were watching, that we weren't just reacting anymore. We were a threat. Then came the leak. A brown envelope, slid under my gate by someone with shaking hands and a conscience. Inside, a copy of a fake police report. My name at the top. Subject exhibits paranoid, violent behavior. Armed, aggressive. Potential domestic instability. Underneath, a doctored image of me yelling, "Freeze," framed from a clip taken during Riker's porch assault. The image was edited to look like I was the attacker. The HOA was building a case against me, preparing to paint me as the threat, a domestic extremist, a pretext for whatever they wanted to do next. I scanned the packet into my system. Walt ran it against county databases. Nothing official had been filed yet, but the document had a footer I recognized. A legal watermark from the same Denver consultancy that wrote the HOA's rules. They weren't reporting me to the police. They were creating their own police. And soon enough, they'd try to act on it. That's when the inspection notice arrived. Not a letter this time, a formal summons. Certified envelope, sealed and delivered by hand. Emergency board inspection, it read. To ensure safety compliance and determine continued eligibility for residency. The date was set for Saturday morning. Time, 800. Authorized personnel, 6. Uniformed. Badged. Security cleared. It wasn't an inspection. It was an operation. They were coming back to finish what they started. I called my old team. Reed would handle comms. Lando would monitor inbound frequencies and local emergency chatter. Mira, our infiltration and close quarters specialist, offered to fly in, but I told her to stand by. If things went loud, I wanted witnesses. I updated the wall with their photos, their shifts, their routes. We laid down suppression lines, recording beams, magnetic ID catchers, even chemical tags for tracking footprints. Walt deployed 2 new drones, silent rotors, facial rec scanners, thermal tethers. They'd know the moment boots crossed the property line. I spent Friday night reinforcing the house. Steel plates behind the drywall. Cameras in every window. Sound sensors in the gutters. My ranch had always been a refuge. Now it was a fortress. At 6:42 Saturday morning, we spotted them. 6 SUVs, matte black, one with visible lights, the rest unmarked. They pulled onto the main road slow, like they were just another utility crew, but they staggered formation. One vehicle broke off and parked 2 lots down. Sniper support, I marked him. Second SUV pulled forward, parked just outside the gate. Walt activated the long-range mic. Riker stepped out. Full gear. Kevlar, utility belt, tactical gloves. He carried a folder in one hand and what looked like a stun baton in the other. He didn't speak, just walked up to the gate and clipped the inspection notice to the latch. Then he smiled into the nearest camera. It wasn't a real smile. It was a warning. We waited. Didn't engage. They stood at the edge of the property for 20 minutes, cameras scanning, making notes. Then, a signal from the earpiece. They turned and left. No knock. No forced entry. No shots. But I knew what that meant. They were mapping. Testing response times. Documenting resistance. Checking for holes in our setup. This wasn't an inspection. This was recon. At 10:03 a.m., the HOA's official website published a press release. Rising threats in quiet communities when residents turn hostile. The article featured an aerial photo of my ranch, my name, a quote from Karen about ongoing safety concerns. It called me a threat to public order, said the HOA had been forced to take preemptive actions to ensure the safety of their staff and neighboring homeowners. They'd flipped the script. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the monster. But that was their mistake. Because now I had everything I needed. They came to paint me as unstable. What they didn't realize, what they never considered, was that I wasn't unstable. I was prepared. And this time, I'd set the trap. They came at 7:59, not 8:0, not late, 1 minute early. Like any real op, it was designed to catch us off guard. But I wasn't just waiting, I was watching. 6 SUVs approached in a staggered line, formation tight, predictable. One peeled off again, just like before. 2 inspectors walked the perimeter with handheld scanners, pretending to read for code violations. Walt's thermals lit them up on my screen. No tools. Sidearms under the vests. One of them's got bolt cutters, he said. This ain't code enforcement. I nodded. Trigger 1 activated as soon as their boots crossed the gravel just past the fence post. Trip sensor embedded in the soil sent a ping to my system. Camera 1 rotated, zeroed on their faces. Every angle was covered. Not just for defense, for prosecution. Riker exited the lead vehicle and walked up to the gate again. This time, he didn't bother smiling. He scanned something on a handheld device, probably forged documentation for an enforced wellness check. When the gate didn't open automatically, he waved his team forward. 2 more enforcers exited the second SUV, this time with a mobile drone. Not HOA issue. This was tactical, civilian grade, but government spec. They launched it into the sky and began sweeping for blind spots. Walt hacked in within 18 seconds and rerouted the feed into a false loop. All they saw was a harmless, quiet ranch. A peaceful home. One they were about to violate. I sat in the barn, staring at the monitors, Emily's picture clipped to the edge of the screen. Her face was bruised in the last frame we had of her. Security cam footage from the holding depot. I hadn't seen her in 5 days. Every second I waited boiled something darker inside of me. And now, they were here, trying to finish the narrative, to frame me as the threat. But I wasn't the one crossing the line. Riker motioned. The third team moved to the side gate. I watched as they clipped the lock. The moment it snapped, Trigger 2 activated. A bright red light blinked twice from the oak tree cam, signaling breach. I hit a key on my terminal. Fence mode activated. Magnetized steel panels locked into place. Gate bolts driven down hydraulically. The ranch was sealed. I stood, grabbed the tablet that contained every citation, violation, abuse record, and time-stamped security footage. Walt looked at me. "You ready?" "No," I said. "I'm done waiting." Outside, Riker was shouting, "This is a scheduled inspection under HOA code provision 6.12. You are legally required to comply. Open the gate now or face enforcement escalation." His voice echoed off the valley like he believed it, like those words still carried power. But I had rewritten the rules. I activated the loudspeaker. "You are currently trespassing on private property. No legal inspection has been filed with the state. You have no warrant, no authority. Leave now or be detained." The silence that followed was brief. Then Riker raised his fist and waved the team forward. And that's when the siege began. They breached the gate using a battery-powered spreader. The metal gave, but not before cameras 3 through 8 captured everything. Helmet cams, body mics, vehicle GPS logs. Trigger 3 set off a signal to a private server Walt had configured. A real-time upload feed to a remote law firm in Colorado. They weren't just watching. They were recording everything for federal review. Riker's team stormed the yard, scanning for me like they expected gunfire. But I didn't meet them with bullets. I met them with truth. Every trip they took was documented. Every step across the threshold, every piece of equipment pulled, cataloged. Trigger 4, embedded behind the porch columns, activated an overhead camera with a 300-degree lens. As Riker entered the main house, without a warrant, I hit the final switch. A metal barrier slammed shut behind him. Magnetic, electrified, no escape. I walked through the back door of the barn and into the open, arms up, tablet in one hand. "Drop your weapon," Riker barked, pointing a Glock at me. "I'm unarmed," I said. "You just violated 6 federal statutes, 4 state laws, and 32 HOA protocols you swore to enforce, all caught on tape." He hesitated. That's when the sirens started. Walt had made the call 2 minutes earlier, sent the pre-written packet to the state attorney general's office, along with footage of Emily being abducted, along with the blueprints for the illegal detention program, along with everything we'd uncovered. And they moved fast. You don't ignore a file dump like that. You don't ignore a 142-page document of coordinated HOA abuse with synchronized timestamps, victim logs, and unlawful enforcement actions. The state troopers arrived in a convoy. But they weren't the only ones. Behind them, federal vehicles, DOJ, Civil Rights Division, 2 unmarked vans from the State Ethics Bureau, and, thank God, an ambulance. Because they'd found Emily. 2 miles from the depot, handcuffed in a private transport unit operated by one of the HOA's partner wellness agencies. She was bruised, dehydrated, and furious, but alive. When they cut her free, she said only one thing: "Where's my husband?" When I saw her step out of the ambulance, I didn't cry. I just nodded. Once, she nodded back. They arrested Riker first. He didn't resist, just stared at me like he still didn't understand how the tables had turned. The other 5 enforcers were processed on site, all their gear seized, all their footage confiscated. Karen was pulled from her yoga class 2 hours later, still in leggings, barefoot, screaming about property values. When they put the cuffs on her, she wailed like it was the end of civilization. In a way, it was. The fallout was nuclear. News stations ran the footage on loop. Suburban siege in Harmony Valley. Caught running illegal detention centers. When code enforcement becomes tyranny. I sat with Emily on the porch as the sun set, tablet on my lap, legal documents still glowing on the screen, my hand wrapped around her uninjured one. She sipped tea, I sipped bourbon, and we watched the last of the black SUVs get towed out of the valley. The state dissolved the HOA within 2 weeks, all its assets frozen, all its officers indicted. Karen pled not guilty, claimed she was ensuring community wellness. Her trial date is next month. Riker's being tried under RICO statutes. That's what happens when your little enforcement unit becomes a criminal organization across state lines. They offered me interviews, book deals, cable specials. I declined every one. I gave all our footage to the feds. My only request? That they audit every HOA in the state. And they did. Turns out ours wasn't the only one running dark. But it was the first one to fall. Emily sleeps better now. She started planting again. The garden's coming back. She put the coop back together herself. I fixed the fence post from the morning they took her, not because it needed fixing, because now it stands as a marker, a line they crossed, and one I made sure they never forgot. I sit on the porch every morning now, coffee in one hand, surveillance monitor in the other. The cameras are still up, the sensors still blink, but the ranch is quiet, peaceful. The land knows we're safe again. And the neighbors? They wave now. A little lower, a little slower, like they remember that this land has boundaries, and they are not to be crossed.